I got started in UFO studies when I was 16 years of age. If you know my story, I got interested in astronomy when I was 7. By age 16, I was heading up the Vancouver Astronomical Society, said, hey, we need to have an exhibit at the Pacific National Exhibition. We had a lot of visitors, but they put us right next to the Flying Saucer Club. So people would go there, talk to them, then they'd come and say, hey, what do you think of what they're saying over there? And so from then on, everywhere I went, I had to be the guy that processed the UFO reports. And most astronomers have never been an amateur astronomer. I'm one of the rare astronomers who began as an amateur astronomer and then turned pro. So every university I was serving at, they said, well, you've got an amateur astronomy background, you handle all the UFO reports we get. And astronomy departments get a lot of UFO reports. So, and I can tell you that 99% of what people would report to me were not really UFOs. And people always ask me, what was at the top of the list? It's fireballs. You say, what's a fireball? It's a meteor that makes a close encounter with you. I've seen them as large as 4 times the diameter of the moon, so they can be quite spectacular. The ones to watch out for are the ones that get bigger and bigger and bigger and don't move in the sky. That happens, you want to move away as fast as possible. Okay, but what I found that was interesting is that in terms of the UFOs that cannot be explained by natural phenomena or secret military activity or hoaxes, and boy, I had dealt with a lot of hoaxes, especially when I was at the university. A lot of these university students love to play pranks that got reported as UFOs. But what I notice is the residual, the most common occurrence is 3 a.m. in the morning on lonely country roads. Well, who hangs out at lonely country roads at 3 a.m. in the morning? That's where all the astronomy observatories are. They kind of build a little road in, and there's your observatory. But what's interesting is that if you look at the population of professional astronomers, very few of them have had encounters with UFOs. But I do know, too, that we're frequently seeing UFOs. These were 2 astronomers from York University who would come on our radio telescope, and they would get maybe 3 to 4 hours of observing time per year. But every time they had a UFO encounter. And I was a graduate student logging over 1,500 hours per year. I didn't see anything. And I knew other astronomers that were logging 1,000 hours plus a year. They never saw anything. But what was it about these 2? They were distinct from the rest of us in that they were deep into the occult. And they were seeing them every time. And that's something I noticed from that time forward, is there's a direct correlation between people who have these UFO encounters, especially the close encounters, where they get within 500 feet or closer. There's a direct correlation between people having those encounters and their UFO or their occult background. And the deeper they are into the occult, the more likely they are to have these encounters. And it's amazing how many of them have multiple encounters. So it doesn't just happen once, it happens repeatedly, just like it did with the 2 astronomers I knew from York University. And I got invited at the end of the 1980s to go to the Soviet Union. And they said, we have all these PhD scientists who get to go to Western conferences. And so they said, we want you to come to Russia to speak on issues of science and faith. And I said, this is an atheist country. They said, we know. We're basically bringing you over to appease these PhD level scientists because they get outside. But they said, if we ever catch you sharing anything about the Christian faith as someone who doesn't have a PhD in science, we'll immediately deport you and you'll never be invited back. So that was a condition in which I visited Russia. They also said, you don't get to pick what you speak on. They will pick. And so I came with 30 different lectures that I could give. Some of them that were technical science, and the rest of them were on science-faith issue. 60% of the 40 lectures I gave were on UFOs and extraterrestrials. That's what they wanted me to speak on. I quickly found out why. At that time in the Soviet Union, I found out they were way behind technologically than the West, but they didn't want people to find out. I mean, I was just appalled by the technology I saw there at that time. But what I also discovered is the physics departments, the universities there, they all had a department of occult physics because they thought in the occult, we can get a leg up on the West. They were really focused on developing occult weaponry. Consequently, when I would speak to audiences of physicists, I was shocked by how many of them had these close encounters with UFOs, over 50%. That never happens to an American audience. As you saw, we took a survey here, right? And I'll bet you a lot of you put up your hands. You weren't seeing a real UFO as something that we could probably explain as natural phenomena or military activity. In fact, I did get to see, quote, a UFO once when I was on the telescope. It was this very fast-flying aircraft that came over, stopped over our radio telescope and hovered, but there was radio interference that was messing up our observations. So we called NORAD headquarters and said, please tell your pilots to go somewhere else. They said, we don't have any aircraft with those kinds of capabilities. Well, now we know they did. And when we threatened to call the Ottawa newspapers, they said, don't do that, don't do that. And that was the end of those, that kind of a UFO encounter. That kind of stuff does happen. But I just saw there was a direct correspondence between the degree of occult activity and people. In fact, what we see in our book, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men, I'm the one that wrote most of the chapters in that book. It's out there at the table, you can pick it up, is that if you will close the doors to the occult, that will be the end of your UFO experiences. So you say, we have a testable model. It's scientifically testable. If you dive deep into the occult, the deeper you dive, the more encounters you'll have. If you close the doors to the occult, and that means not only closing your doors, but closing the doors of your close relatives, because these demonic creatures can operate through your close relatives. So it wants to be family-wide. That will be the end of your UFO experiences. And so it's a testable explanation. Now, I also wrote the chapter on why the most common explanation for UFOs cannot possibly be correct. And that is this idea that physical aliens like us came from a distant planetary system and visited us. That explains the origin of life on planet Earth. That explains the Cambrian explosion. As you heard in the introduction, there's actually a recently published paper saying there's no other explanation for the Cambrian explosion other than the fact that aliens came here and deposited these creatures here on planet Earth. And they've actually come multiple times. You know, I think they're onto something. It is an alien that brought life to planet Earth. But it's an alien from beyond the universe that created the universe. And he was the one that came here and created life on planet Earth, not just once, but multiple times. So at least they're onto something. They're getting close to the right answer. But, you know, there's this myth that outer space is empty. And yes, it's a better vacuum than what we're able to create in a physics lab, but it's not completely empty. In 1 cubic meter, you'll typically have 1 or 2 protons or neutrons. That's not a lot of stuff. However, if you move through interstellar space at a fast enough velocity that you can travel from one planetary system to another planetary system, those particles will do damage to your craft. And the bigger your spaceship, the more damage you're going to accumulate as you try to traverse interstellar space. This has now been recognized by people like Elon Musk, who is really focused on sending spaceships to the nearest star. Nearest star is 4.25 light years away, but because of what we now know is in interstellar space, they're saying there's no way we can send a big spaceship. If we send a big spaceship, it'll be totally destroyed as it tries to traverse. And they're only talking going 10% the velocity of light. So we're looking at 44 years to make the trip to the nearest star. That's a slow velocity. Say, well, we could get there faster by going 20% the velocity of light. Yes, but you get 4 times the damage to your spaceship. So you don't want to go very fast. Now, what they've discovered is if there's any way we're going to be able to send spaceships to the nearest star and get any useful information back, we're going to have to send 1,000 spaceships. We're going to send them at 10% the velocity of light. And we know that these spaceships cannot be made any bigger than 10 centimeters. So these are small spaceships. only about that big across, moving at 10% the velocity of light. They anticipate that over 500 will be completely destroyed. The other 500 will be partly damaged, but the goal is that they'll be able to operate sufficiently that we're going to get some information back about the planet that's orbiting the nearest star. So this is a serious proposal, but this proposal is also outlining why it's simply not possible that you could get beings the size of us crossing interstellar space. And I've got friends who are involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligent life, and they already know that there's nothing within 300 light years of us that has a technology as advanced as what we manifested in 1945. And so they're going to have to make a trip of at least 300 light years. And even if you move at 10% the velocity of light, that's looking at 3,000 years to get from there to here. Another important data point, the technology we have today, the longest it can be possibly sustained, regardless of wealth or technology, is about 2,000 years. So it's in the scientific literature. The maximum lifetime of a technologically advanced civilization is only 2,000 years. And we already know from the SETI program, you're looking at a traverse time that's longer than those 2,000 years. And who's to say your grandchildren are going to be just as motivated to make the trip as you are? They might say, forget this, we're heading back. So there's that problem as well. So this is now in the scientific literature. Also in the scientific literature is we are the first intelligent beings in the universe. Why? Because they've calculated the minimum time to go from the creation of the universe to having the possibility of a species of life as advanced as we are. And that minimum time is the age of the universe. So they're saying maybe intelligent life after us, but not before us. As before us, if it's not before us, there's no way they can get here within the time. And hey, we're talking about an intelligent creature that's smaller than a tiny termite. And they're not going to be intelligent enough to develop civilization. How much more time do I have, or am I all out?
7 minutes.
I got 7 minutes left. Oh, that's good to hear. Because that was the minimum I wanted to get across to you. What I can also share with you is why we're convinced this cannot possibly be a physical phenomena and yet is real. What you'll see in Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men, we're now looking at we're going to do an update of the book, but we're now looking at over 2,000 documented cases where you got 3 or more observers watching the UFO go through the atmosphere. And the advantage of having 3 observers, that means you can track the trajectory. If you've got 3 geographically separated observers looking at the same event, that means you can triangulate it and actually determine the path, which allows you to determine the velocity that it's taking to go through the atmosphere. You say, well, what's the top velocity? 18,000 miles per hour. But when it's observed going through the atmosphere, no sonic boom, and no observed heat friction. If you ever watch the space shuttle go through the atmosphere, and I've had the opportunity to do that a few times, you just see this huge heat trail of radiation behind it because it's encountering the atmosphere and it's causing heat to build up around the space shuttle. When the UFOs go through the atmosphere, we see no evidence of heat friction, no sonic booms. Physical objects will always give you a sonic boom and will always give you a heat friction. But these 2,000 cases is where the UFO goes through the atmosphere, where we can track the velocity, and they crash into the Earth. And when they crash into the Earth, you go to the site. And as you also heard from what we heard here, is that when it comes to the Earth, you can actually see some radiation damage evidence. The vegetation is damaged. If there's snow in the vicinity, the snow is melted. And you can even see a crater where the ground is depressed by as much as 14 inches. Now, that only happens if something real actually made the crater. But you scour the crater site, you cannot find any artifacts or debris. When an aircraft crashes into the Earth, there's lots of stuff there that you can recover from the aircraft. With these UFOs, there's nothing to recover. But there's a crater. Snow is melted. Vegetation is damaged. We see evidence of radiation effects, which tells us 2 things. The UFO phenomena is real, but it's not physical. Now, One of the professors I had when I was at the University of Toronto was Carl Sagan, and he spoke about UFOs in that course, and it was extremely dismissive of UFOs. But his worldview would not tolerate the existence of a non-physical reality. He was an atheist. And therefore, he said, the only thing that's out there is, in fact, he's famous for that mantra of his, the universe is all there is or was or ever will be, which means the only thing that can possibly exist is physical reality. There's no such thing as non-physical reality, so he just dismissed the UFO phenomena. Now, I remember taking that course. I think I was the only Christian in the lecture hall there, but saying, you know what? I got a different worldview. As a Christian, I do believe in non-physical reality. You know, God is a spirit being. Yes, the second person of the Trinity is a physical body, but God the Father does not. The Holy Spirit does not. They're real, but they're not physical. And the angelic beings, they're real, but they're not physical. And yeah, what you see in Lights in the Sky, Little Green Men, if you look at all the evidence that's out there, and by the way, in terms of documented UFO encounters, over 20 million worldwide. This is not a tiny database. It's not something you can sweep under the carpet. 2,000 crash cases have now reached into the literature, which is why people like Jacques Vallée, an astrophysicist as well, concludes this is a real phenomena, but it's not part of our dimensions. This is not coming from creatures that are constrained by the laws of physics and the space-time dimensions of the universe. But that's what the Bible tells us about angelic beings. God did create another species of intelligent life. He created us humans that are constrained by the physics of the universe and the space-time dimensions. He also created angels that are intelligent, but they're not constrained by the physics of the universe or the space-time dimensions. And you also heard about the fact that there's a message that comes from the really close encounters, the ones of the third kind, where people claim to have actually had contact and communication with these so-called UFO beings. There's even cases where these UFO beings put the human contactee into a trance where they're on a typewriter and they actually begin to write material, including what you probably have heard of, the Urantia book. The original edition was over 4,000 pages. A third of its content is focused on denying the deity of Jesus Christ.
Wow.
The other thing we notice in the UFO phenomena, it's not benign. The best you're going to come away from with a close encounter less than 500 feet is recurring, terrifying nightmares. You say, what's the worst case scenario? You get killed by the encounter. There's actually documentation where a UFO encounter took place and the animals of the human contactee were injured or killed, and the children were injured and killed. So it can be a very serious phenomena where you can have those kinds of experiences, which is why we tell people at the end of our book, Lights in the Sky, Little Green Men, if you know of anyone that's having these kinds of experiences, do everything you can to break the occult connection. Demons, the fallen angels, can only invade your life if you give them permission. And if you take away the permission by eliminating the occult in your life, that will be the end of those kinds of experiences. So you'll see in our book a list of these things that get you into the occult. So get rid of those 43 things, and that'll be the end of your UFO encounters. Thank you.